The woods were alive, not with the usual sounds of birds and squirrels. No, these woods whispered. The wind sighed through ancient trees, their branches gnarled like skeletal fingers. Shadows danced in the fading light, twisting into monstrous shapes. Locals told tales of the whispering woods, stories of lost souls and ancient evils. Few dared to enter, and those who did rarely spoke of it again. The air grew heavy with a strange energy. A chill ran down your spine, even on the hottest summer day. It was as if the woods themselves were watching, waiting for their next victim.
Alex scoffed at the stories. He had heard them all his life, tales of ghosts and goblins haunting the whispering woods. Ghosts and goblins? Childish nonsense, he thought. Such things were the stuff of fairy tales, not reality. He was a man of science, a firm believer in logic and reason. Superstitions had no place in his world. So, when his friends dared him to spend a night in the whispering woods, he laughed. It was an opportunity to prove them wrong. He would prove them wrong, debunk the myths and legends that had scared so many for generations. Armed with a flashlight and a healthy dose of skepticism, Alex entered the woods. He was ready to face whatever lay ahead. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to dance and twist in the fading light. The whispers started subtly, a rustling of leaves, a creak of branches. At first he dismissed them as the wind, but as Alex ventured deeper, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to be forming words, phrases. They seemed to be calling his name, drawing him deeper into the heart of the woods. His skepticism began to waver. He paused, looking around nervously. The forest seemed alive, watching him, waiting. His flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows that played tricks on his mind. Was it just his imagination? He heard footsteps behind him, soft and deliberate. He spun around, but there was no one there. His breath came out in visible puffs in the cold night air. The temperature seemed to drop suddenly. A chill ran down his spine. For the first time, he felt a twinge of fear. What if the stories were true? But he shook it off, determined to continue. He was here to prove a point, after all. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening. They seemed to be all around him, closing in. Doubt and fear crept into his mind. He had never felt so alone, so vulnerable. In the distance, he saw a shadowy figure. It was just standing there, watching him. His heart pounded in his chest. He took a step forward, then another. The figure didn't move. He reached out, his hand trembling. The figure seemed to dissolve into the mist, leaving him alone once more. Alex stood there, alone in the dark forest, his mind racing. What had he just seen? Was it real or just a trick of the light? He took a deep breath, steeling himself. He was determined to uncover the truth, no matter what it took. With renewed determination, he walked deeper into the woods, the whispers guiding his way. The path, barely visible in the fading light, twisted and turned. Each step Alex took seemed to echo in the silence, the crunch of leaves underfoot a stark contrast to the oppressive quiet that surrounded him. The deeper he ventured, the more the path seemed to disappear, swallowed by the encroaching darkness. The trees pressed closer, their branches forming a canopy overhead, blocking out the last rays of the setting sun. The once familiar forest now felt like an alien world, each tree a silent sentinel watching his every move. The air grew colder, and the shadows lengthened, creating an almost tangible sense of foreboding. Alex shivered, a sudden chill running down his spine. He pulled his jacket tighter around himself, trying to ward off the creeping cold. His breath came out in visible puffs, a stark reminder of the dropping temperature. The forest seemed to close in around him, the trees whispering secrets he couldn't quite hear. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest. The whispers seemed to be coming from all around him now, swirling and eddying in the air. They were indistinct, just on the edge of comprehension, but filled with a sense of urgency and dread. Each whisper seemed to pull him deeper into the forest, away from the safety of the known. He stopped, shining his flashlight into the darkness, but the beam only seemed to illuminate the trees immediately surrounding him, their bark dark and damp. The light flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced and shifted. making it hard to distinguish reality from illusion. The forest seemed alive, each movement a potential threat. The feeling of being watched intensified. He was being hunted. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent his heart racing. He could almost feel eyes on him, tracking his every move. The forest was no longer just a place. It was a presence, a living entity that seemed to be closing in on him, intent on keeping him within its grasp. A flicker of movement caught his eye. A shadow, darker than the surrounding darkness, detached itself from the trees. It moved with an unnatural fluidity, gliding towards him. Alex froze, his blood turning to ice in his veins. He raised his flashlight, aiming the beam at the figure. Two glowing red eyes burned in the darkness. They seemed to pierce through him, seeing into his very soul. The whispers intensified, becoming a chorus of voices, chanting, moaning, screaming. Fear, primal and consuming, gripped Alex's heart. He didn't hesitate. He turned and ran, crashing through the undergrowth, his flashlight bouncing wildly, casting grotesque shadows that danced around him. The whispers pursued him, urging him on, their voices filled with a mocking laughter. He could hear the sound of his own ragged breathing, the pounding of his heart in his ears. Thorns tore at his clothes, branches whipped at his face, but he didn't dare slow down. He could feel the presence of the shadowy figure behind him, its cold, malevolent presence closing in. The whispers grew louder, morphing into distinct voices. They taunted him, mocked his fear. They told him he couldn't escape, that he was destined to join them in their eternal torment. He stumbled, falling to his knees, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Looking back, he saw the shadowy figure standing at the edge of the light, its red eyes burning into him. It took a step closer, and the whispers reached a deafening crescendo. Alex scrambled to his feet, pushing himself beyond his limits. He had to escape. He burst through a thicket of trees and found himself in a small clearing, but his relief was short-lived. Standing in the center of the clearing was the shadowy figure, its red eyes gleaming in the darkness. The whispers surrounded him, a cacophony of voices, each one filled with pain and despair. He was trapped with nowhere left to run.
The figure glided towards him, its movements fluid and graceful, like a predator toying with its prey.
As the figure reached out, its shadowy hand almost touching him, a blinding light erupted from his pocket. The whispers abruptly ceased, the figure vanished, and Alex collapsed to the ground, his heart pounding in his chest. Catching his breath, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the source of the light, a letter old and yellowed, addressed to him in elegant script. The clearing was bathed in a soft, warm light, emanating from the letter itself. He had no memory of putting it there. Hesitantly, he unfolded the brittle paper. The letter spoke of a curse, a darkness that had fallen upon the woods generations ago. It was a tale whispered among the villagers, a story that sent shivers down the spine of anyone who dared to listen. The woods, once vibrant and full of life, had become a place of dread and despair. Shadows danced between the trees, and an eerie silence hung in the air, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. It told of a ritual, a sacrifice that could break the curse. The ritual was ancient, passed down through hushed voices and secret gatherings. It required a descendant of the one who had first invoked the curse, a bloodline tainted by the darkness. The sacrifice was not just a physical offering, but a test of courage and resolve, a battle against the malevolent forces that had taken root in the heart of the forest. And at the bottom of the letter, written in the same flowing script, was his name. Alex's heart pounded as he read it, the weight of his ancestors' sins pressing down on him. The letter was old, its edges frayed and yellowed with age, yet the ink was fresh, as if it had been written just moments before he found it. Alex was the descendant of the one who had cursed the woods, and it was his destiny to either break the curse or become another of its victims. The responsibility was immense, and the fear of failure gnawed at him. He had heard the stories, seen the fear in the eyes of the elders, and now it was his turn to face the darkness. The forest seemed to call to him, its whispers growing louder with each passing moment. But as he stared at the letter, a single drop of blood fell from his finger, staining the aged paper. The blood seemed to pulse, spreading across the parchment like a living thing. It was as if the forest itself was reacting to his presence, acknowledging the return of the cursed bloodline. The air grew colder, and the shadows deepened, wrapping around him like a shroud. As the blood soaked into the letter, the soft light vanished, and the whispers returned, colder and angrier than before. They spoke of pain and suffering, of lives lost to the darkness. Alex knew that the time had come to act, to confront the curse that had plagued his family for generations. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but he was determined to end the nightmare once and for all. The fate of the woods and his own soul hung in the balance.
The shadowy figure reappeared, its red eyes burning with renewed intensity. It reached for Alex again, and this time there was no escape.
The shadows wrapped around him, pulling him down into the darkness. He screamed, but his voice was swallowed by the whispers, and then silence. Alex was gone, consumed by the darkness, another lost soul in the whispering woods.
The wind howled through the trees, carrying the whispers far and wide. And in the distance a new pair of red eyes flickered in the darkness, a new guardian of the whispering woods. The curse lived on,